which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice for all.
Thank you. We are now on our agenda at our recognitions. And hold on just a moment. We have a recognition tonight, and it's one we couldn't skip this year or any year. On behalf of the board, I will sign a proclamation designating May as Guilford County School Employee Appreciation Month to let all GCS employees know that even though we are not physically together, we see you and appreciate you. The GCS Employee Appreciation Campaign expands on National Teacher Appreciation Week during the first week in May. Staff are working remotely, but we can still show our appreciation for all that they are doing to keep kids learning and fed during the COVID-19 school closure. For the 10th consecutive year, we want to not only thank our teachers, but also thank all employees who work together to help our children thrive. This year, especially, employees are taking on new challenges, serving in new roles, and embracing new environments, and we wish to acknowledge the enormous efforts they have made to adapt to these changes. Guilford County Schools Employee Appreciation Month will give the district and the community an opportunity to say thank you and to show our educators and school employees that the respect they deserve, not just this month, but every month. I will now read aloud the proclamation designating May as Guilford County School Employee Appreciation Month. Declaring May 2020 as Employee Appreciation Month, whereas Guilford County Schools is a district with tremendous educators who work to open students' minds to ideas, knowledge, and dreams. And whereas educators work with other support staff to help students achieve excellence in the classroom and beyond. And whereas these dedicated employees, including teachers, bus drivers, counselors, social workers, principals, custodians, school nutrition staff, central office support staff, and more, work together to keep the district moving forward day to day, month to month, and each and every school year. And whereas, even though we are separated physically, we are united in a spirit of appreciation for the efforts of Guilford County School employees to continue learning and serving students and families during this school closure. And whereas Guilford County Schools will celebrate National Teacher Appreciation Day on May 5th, 2020, and expand the celebration to the entire month of May to give time to thank all educators and staff. And therefore, we, the Guilford County Board of Education, hereby recognize the month of May in the year 2020 as Guilford County School Employee Appreciation Month to show appreciation for all employees. So if you will all join me in giving them a round of applause any way that we can demonstrate that, to thank our employees for all that they do, even when we're not under such difficult circumstances. So thank you very much. The superintendent recommends that the board accept the proclamation recognizing May 2020 as Employee Appreciation Month. So we don't need a motion for that, do we? Yeah. Oh, all right. Is there a motion?
Make a motion that we...
all right. So, Diane, I didn't hear you. Let's see. Make sure my internet is working.
Can you hear me now?
Diane, did you make the motion?
I tried to.
Second.
Did you hear me? I said I made the motion.
They're not in my ear.
Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Thank you.
It's a miracle. Okay.
I make a motion that we give our employees the recognition they deserve by accepting this proclamation.
Okay, and that was seconded by Winston?
I'll second.
Oh, Kim Irby. Okay, thank you very much. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And once again, thank you to all of our employees. Public comments have been mailed to the Board of Education. And we are now at approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
Move the approval of the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. What was that? That's down here at the budget piece. We are now at the consent agenda. Dr. Contreras.
Thank you. This evening, for your review is the personnel report and the addendum to the personnel report. That concludes this evening's consent agenda for your consideration.
Move the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, that was moved by Dianne Bellamy Small. And the second was made by Kim Irby. Comments, questions, or votes? Dianne? Oh, your hand's not up. Okay. All right, well, we will go through and vote as we see all of the pictures up. Darlene?
Yes.
Dianne?
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
Pat?
Yes.
Linda?
Yes.
Switch screen. Anita?
No.
Winston?
Yes.
Byron?
Yes.
All right, that passes by a vote of 8 to 1. We are now at the public hearing on the 2021 budget. I have a few comments that I will read. This is from Marquise Jackson. Good morning. I am sharing my thoughts on the budget. I think the budget is right to include more money for technology. There are a lot of parents who have multiple children in their home trying to work on one tablet. I think there should be at least 2 per home. Even after the pandemic is over, technology will be needed at home to continue remediation services far beyond the normal school day, which could include free online tutoring. I would also like to comment on GCS staff receiving raises. Guilford County Schools has an amazing staff that needs to be accommodated for their service and hard work and their ability to readjust from what was normal to ensure the community still receives the services they need. We only have, I think, 5 of these. This is the second one from Patricia Ward. I am the parent of a kindergartner at Jesse Wharton. Distance learning has been very challenging on him.
Can people mute because we dually?
Okay, yes, if everyone could mute their mics until you're ready to make a comment so it won't be any background noise. Thank you, Winston. Distance learning has been very challenging on him and us due to his disability. I want to make sure that a budget with the priority of recovering lost learning time also includes support services for all students with active individual education programs. During the school closures, IEPs have not been able to be fully implemented, causing many students with disabilities to regress without in-person learning and special education supports. IEPs are contracts between the student and the school. It is imperative that any budget considerations fully fund exceptional children's services on par with nutrition and internet access. Failure to fully fund these programs screams to parents of children with disabilities that you do not support us. We are some of the staunchest supporters of public education. What will happen to your advocates if you continue to ignore our needs? Thank you for your time. Regards, Donna Patricia Ward. Our next comment is from Don Vaudrell. I want to address the essential workers, custodians pay in our county. The current school year, 2019-2020, it was budgeted to give them a raise that has now been taken away. Why? The next school year, 2020-2021, they are included across the board, raise of 2%. Thank you. Custodians are a vital component to beat this COVID-19 and to keep our students safe for the coming years. During this unprecedented pandemic, this staff must not be overlooked. Thank you for your time and consideration. Our fourth comment is from Monique Ford. As a parent of an elementary age student and middle school senior, we need to please enforce mandatory tutoring for all students. We need to reinforce technology. There should be options for parents and students to enroll children into online classes, either part-time or full-time. Students need books they can bring home as well as books to keep in school. Schools which needed repairs should be put as a priority to have the schools repaired for the safety of the students. Thank you, Ms. Ford. And our last comment is, this correspondence is a formal request from the Greensboro Business League to the Guilford County Schools Board of Education to support and enforce fair and equitable policies for Guilford County's African American businesses. As a result of present existing disparities in awarding contracts to Black business owners in construction, professional services, the purchasing of goods and other commodities in Guilford County Schools, the Greensboro Business League is proposing a joint partnership with Guilford County Schools to help increase contract opportunities and reduce the economic racial disparity in contracting. The present coronavirus health crisis only exacerbates the existing fragile status of Guilford County's African American business sector. The level of commitment and action of Guilford County School Board members to the effort to end the economic disparity will be the most critical determining factor to achieve success. Two key factors to addressing the issues heretofore mentioned above is staff accountability and same-day immediate notification to the Greensboro Business League of the completion and printing of contract bids and proposals. Guilford County school contracts for bids may be assessed by GBL, Greensboro Business League, on a case-by-case basis early in the process for rigorous MWBE analysis to determine what good faith effort is required to comply with Guilford County Schools' Minority Women's Business Enterprise aspirational goals. This information is provided to the Guilford County School Board 4 to 5 weeks before Guilford County School Board consideration of contract proposals. Staff accountability is critical to the process, specifically the purchasing department and department managers. Holding staff accountable on all areas of MWBE compliance and best practices toward meeting the mandates of the program will substantially contribute to its success. Thank you for your consideration to partner with GBL to support the future growth and economic vitality of High Point, Greensboro, and Guilford County. That is the last of our comments relating to the budget. We are now at, reports from the chair. Good evening. First, I want to congratulate the superintendent who learned today that she was named as the Piedmont Triad Education Consortium Superintendent of the Year. We are so proud to have her as a visionary leader for this district, in addition to recognizing all of our employees for the month of May. Hero Day. Our school nutrition workers are awesome all year long, but they deserve special thanks for their work during the school closure. Please consider making a sign in appreciation, and I'm holding up something here. Please consider making a sign in appreciation of our school lunch heroes to display as you pick up meals on Friday. Guilford County Schools is currently serving about 34,000 meals per day and has served more than 820,000 meals since schools were closed on March 14th. Wow. Friday is also College Decision Day. We have received dozens of videos from students to tell us where they were planning to go to college. Thank you to all of those students who participated, and look for the resulting video on GCS TV and on our YouTube channel. Please remember that there is still time to complete the FAFSA application to make your pathway to college easier. More than 55% of Guilford County households have now responded to the 2020 census. We still have a long way to go. This is your chance to make sure you are counted when it comes to representation by elected officials and how billions in federal funding is spent on public schools and many other agencies and projects. It only happens every 10 years, and it only takes a few minutes. Go to 2020census.gov to complete the form. And finally, tonight, let me say congratulations to our spring break reading winners. Vanessa at Sedalia Elementary and Sebastian at Kernodle Middle each won a Kindle, and 33 students earned a gift card to Peppernon Books. These students read at least 300 minutes during the break to qualify for these prizes. Great job, students. Please keep up the reading. This concludes my remarks. Our next item of business is a resolution urging congressional action to approve additional federal education funding for the nation's public schools. Did you want to read this, Dr. Contreras? So, So Board Member Byron Gladden sent this resolution to board members, and we will need to vote on this resolution, and then I will read it. All of the board members have had an opportunity to review the resolution. Is there anyone that has?
I make a motion that we adopt the resolution.
Thank you. Darlene's made a motion to adopt resolution. Who seconded that?
Second.
Was that Dianne?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Excellent, thank you. That passes unanimously. So here's the proclamation. Sorry it's been so long. Resolution urging congressional action to approve additional federal education funding for the nation's public schools. Whereas the COVID-19 pandemic is a monumental and unprecedented challenge, emerging quickly and demanding its immediate overhaul of the instructional plans and strategies of school systems across the country. And whereas the nation's public schools remain committed to delivering high-quality instruction while ensuring the health and safety of our students and staff. And whereas the challenge will persist and likely grow as COVID-19 affects our economy and destabilizes funding for public schools. And whereas reputable economists have predicted the end of the nation's economic expansion and forecast a recession that may be deep and long-lasting. And whereas any nationwide recession is likely to affect urban areas and their poorest citizens most severely. And whereas the numbers of unemployment claims in the nation's big cities are already the highest we've seen since the Great Depression and may only grow. And whereas urban public school systems across the country are already incurring substantial unexpected costs to provide meal services and purchase and deploy digital instructional devices. And whereas urban public schools are facing difficult decisions about how to allocate dwindling financial resources to sustain high-quality instruction and other essential services for students and families over the next several years. And whereas revenue shortfalls will unequivocally result in budget cuts and personnel reductions in urban school systems. And whereas these budget cuts will be happening at the same time that urban public school systems will be working to address the immense instructional challenge of unfinished learning that many students will face coming out of school this year. And whereas the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ERA, of 2009, provided $100 billion in education funding with investments in both the Education Stabilization Fund and various federal categorical programs for public schools, such as Title I and the Individuals with Disabilities Act. And whereas Congress followed ERA in 2010 with $10 billion in additional funding for the Education Jobs Fund to help school districts retain existing employees, recall former employees, and hire new ones. And whereas, by comparison, the recent Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security CARES Act provides only $13 billion for education stabilization funding, which is less than 1/2 of 1% of the total $2.2 trillion relief provided in the CARES Act, and is far below the investment that the federal government provided in 2009 and 2010 in ERA and the Education Jobs Fund. And whereas public education is one of the largest employers of any organization, public or private, in the nation, and whereas published economic research has demonstrated a strong connection between this country's GDP growth and its investments in elementary and secondary education. And whereas research has repeatedly found a strong causal relationship between levels of schooling and wages that individuals earn over a lifetime. And whereas for public schools to thrive and for our students to realize a bright and productive future, the federal government needs to make a substantial new investment in our well-being. And whereas the Council of Great City Schools, the National Education Association, the American Federation of Teachers, the National School Boards Association, the American Association of School Administrators, and the National Parent-Teacher Association, and others have called for some $200 billion in relief for the nation's public schools. And whereas this level of funding is the minimum needed by the nation's urban public schools to sustain and accelerate their academic achievement trends over the past decade, including gains in reading and math achievement that outpace the national average. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Guilford County Board of Education calls on its congressional delegation, including our United States Senate and House of Representative members, to advocate for and approve additional federal education funding for our nation's public schools. Signed this 30th day of April 2020 by Chairperson Dina Hayes and our Superintendent, Dr. Sharon Contreras. Thank you for bearing with me. We are now at our budget discussion. If there are any questions, I'll turn it over to Dr. Contreras and Angie.
So the board comments, superintendent board comments.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good evening. Good evening, and thank you to the board for passing the resolution calling for our federal government to support our schools and to supply the significant financial resources we will need to address learning loss since our buildings were closed in March. This is a major concern for all districts across the country, and I urge our community to contact their elected officials and ask that swift action be taken on the issue. Earlier this week, the Council of the Great City Schools sent a letter to Congress pleading with leaders to provide funding for school systems in the next COVID-19 appropriations bill. I am proud to be one of the more than 50 superintendents of large districts who signed the letter, which you can find on our website. It is critical that our government recognizes and addresses the uphill battle we face to continue serving our students effectively in light of the learning loss we expect to see. We now know that March 13th was the last day of school for the 2019-20 school year. This is not surprising news, but we know it may be upsetting to teachers and students who are looking forward to seeing each other again this school year. While schools will remain closed, remote learning will continue through the academic year. We must keep our students engaged and learning as we expect the impact of the lost classroom time to affect our students for years to come. We know that some districts and parents are feeling overwhelmed, so we are focusing instruction on only 5 to 7 key concepts from each course and grade level to prepare students as much as possible for the next course and grade level. Teachers are engaging with students through live lessons and interactive activities. Nearly 62,000 students logged on to Canvas last week, an increase of 2 percentage points. We are continuing to build resources in all subject areas, particularly in math, where learning loss will be the greatest for students. So to help supplement online instruction, our GCS TV channel has begun airing math instructional videos 4 days a week, starting at 8 a.m. These lessons began today for elementary and will include middle and high school next week. Thank you to our educators and GCS TV staff for making this possible. On Monday, I spoke online with class presidents from each high school to discuss what they would like to see for a graduation ceremony. Most of them felt strongly that a physical graduation was preferable to a virtual one, even if it were to be held next winter. We are still considering our options and await the governor's options to be presented to us, or guidance to be presented on Friday. But I greatly appreciate the students' feedback and guidance. We will be making a decision after we receive guidance from the governor. This is a tough time for all of us, but especially our graduating seniors who likely were looking forward to the once-in-a-lifetime events that mark the end of high school. I applaud our parents, principals, news media, and community members for the many ways they are trying to celebrate these graduates and give them the recognition they deserve. Please keep the creativity coming. The State Board of Education met today and took action to extend the state of emergency leave policy until May 31st. The policy was originally supposed to end today, so we are glad to see that it was extended. More information about the leave can be found under the Human Resources section of our website. Finally, tonight, I just want to recognize the tremendous employees in GCS as we embark on Employee Appreciation Month. A day or a week is simply not enough time to fully express how valuable our employees are to the Guilford County community. Please take time to say thanks to those employees who are giving their all to our students and families. This concludes my remarks.
Thank you. Now we're at budget discussion.
Yes. So I'll turn this over to COO CFO Angie Henry, who will just recap the major points of the budget, and then we'll take any questions that board members might have.
Good evening. We don't have a lot to update since our meeting on Monday regarding the budget. There is some information. There's House Bill 1043 that is moving through the General Assembly. It passed the House today, and now the Senate's moving are working on it. This legislation that does provide some flexibility and relief for school districts in several different areas, but it does also include some budget flexibility, as well as the appropriation or an allocation of funds to the Office of State Budget and Management for several areas, including allocations to the Department of Public Instruction that total close to $291 million to be used in many of the areas that the State Board of Education requested in the information that they sent to the Office of State Budget and Management. Again, this is passed by the House, and we feel like it'll be through the Senate hopefully by tomorrow to provide some resources. And many of these resources are directed to the 5 areas that we had prioritized in our budget, with extended learning, the extended learning time, the assessments, the individual tutoring that we feel like students are going to need to recover lost learning time, as well as devices and connectivity. There's funding for all of these areas within this the budget dollars that are included in this bill. These funds are appropriated for the 2019-20 fiscal year, but it'll be available until December 30th, 2020. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have regarding the budget process.
Don't see any hands raised right now.
Super. Okay.
So Winston?
Yeah. So what we anticipate is that there will be additional funds at the state that might augment what we pass in our current budget. And so I'm asking for that clarification. And secondly, the county has received this 92 or 97 million, something, 90+ billion dollars to also allocate. And so how do those two things impact what we are passing here today? I mean, is this more of a baseline budget and we'll have an opportunity to apply for some funds that augment this, or do you have any sense of that?
Question, but so I'll answer what I think your question was, and if it's not a complete answer, please let me know. So these are not resources that we had anticipated in our budget that we recommended, that the superintendent recommended to the board. These are in addition to that, and if you'll recall, that's part of the reason we talked about taking the $21 million out of the federal grants fund, because we weren't sure how to budget that, because we knew that these dollars were being requested. So these are dollars that will be in addition to the budget that was recommended last week. As far as the dollars for the county, I haven't heard anything. I'll ask the superintendent if she has.
So I just want to stress, although we do anticipate about 21 million additional dollars, you may recall that during the 2008-09 recession, Congress provided nearly $100 billion in additional funding to public schools, and another $10 billion in 2010 for an education jobs fund bill. Right now, public schools have only received $13 billion in the midst of all of the work that we are trying to do to mitigate learning loss, to make sure students and families are fed, to make sure that we are providing virtual learning for students. If you look at the letter that the superintendent sent to Congress about funding, you'll see we are anticipating about a 20% loss in combined state and local revenues on average. And it could result across the country in just 275,000 teachers just in council districts being laid off without some action at the federal level. So while we are grateful for this 21 million, we desperately need to utilize funding that is being received at the state and county level to help with learning loss, remediation, reentry, some of the key benchmarks in terms of the reentry, how we do that safely, especially making certain that all students have access to technology and internet connectivity, something that $21 million will not even begin to touch. So it sounds like a lot to some, but it is very little funding for the needs that we have.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands raised. Byron?
Thank you. Hear me? Okay. Question. Let's see. As it relates to what we're voting on in terms of the funding, is there funding available to continue regarding the behavioral assessments and interventions that were in place prior to school closing, that our staff is able to continue to do that over the summer?
Do you mean basic EC services that
Correct.
we've been providing?
Correct.
Yes, we have to provide those by law.
Okay. And I think we all received an email earlier during the meeting about raises. This budget doesn't include any raises that the board already didn't vote on for the next budget year because we don't know what the allocations are going to be from state.
I think there is a raise in there, a 2% raise. Ms. Henry, if you could address that.
Certainly. So as we were, developing the budget kind of before this crisis started, we did anticipate the General Assembly approving a 2% budget, a salary increase for our certified and our classified staff. So that amount is included in the budget recommendation.
Yeah, right.
Are there any other questions? I don't see anyone's hands raised. Anita?
Okay, had to unmute. The connectivity funding, how is that structured in the 21 million?
I just want to make sure I heard you clearly. Did you ask how much of the 21 million includes connectivity?
No, I just wanted to know how the connectivity funding is structured within the 21 million.
The 21 million, as we've shared, has not been budgeted because we don't know what the state is going to take on. So we believe, as does most of the school districts, that the state and the Fed should be taking on the issue of internet connectivity in the same way the federal government did with electricity, and that it's a public utility and not a luxury. So we have not included funding. We have not budgeted that 21 million until we know for sure what the state is going to address.
And tell me again, you delineated what the 21 million would be used for, and I didn't get it all when you said it. I was listening and not writing.
Yeah, the priorities include technology, and connectivity is a priority. tutoring for students, remediation and acceleration, reentry. I'm looking at Dr. Oakley. I'm missing two areas. Assessments, but the state has said they may take on the diagnostic assessment so we know where students are when they return. And extended learning time for students. Those are the 5 priorities.
Okay. Talk about what extended learning time for students might look like.
Well, we don't know what that looks like yet until we have the safety protocols. So for some students, that might mean additional days, but we may not be able to bring students back to school yet. It could mean providing tutors to extend their virtual day by an hour. It could mean extending the school year for certain schools or certain students. It could mean bringing back vulnerable students and extending their school year. There are many models that could be employed. We are not even sure what local school boards have the autonomy to do and make decisions about, or what decisions will be made at the state level at this point. So I think as we receive more guidance, we could be clearer with you about how we will use those funds, but we certainly don't want to start planning and duplicate the efforts of the state.
But it could involve some modification, or it probably will involve some modification of the school calendar for some students.
We believe it will have to, not just because of lost learning time, but just because of the safety protocols that will have to be employed. So there is no way we will be able to bring back full school populations and move desks 6 feet apart, given the size of the schools. So we'll have to think about how students are returning to school, or the state will have to think about that with us. And that means that some students may need more time. Some students may need less time and more virtual time. All of that will have to be determined at the state level, not which students need what, but certainly what options are available to school systems.
And just for your information, the bill that passed the House and is currently in the Senate and is seemingly moving very quickly has school starting the 17th of August and ending the 10th of June. So it hasn't built in the kinds of time we might want. And it also describes many of those days as remote instruction, whatever that means. So there's a lot more for guidance that we will need both from the legislature and the state board about what some of these things mean and what our expectations are, particularly when you have limited connectivity in neighborhoods.
That they haven't funded that yet, is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Pat and then Byron.
Thank you. That answered most of the questions I had. I was sort of, I guess, dovetailing off of what Anita had brought up, just to make sure that we are in fact covered, at least in the short term, for the potential option for extended learning in the classrooms. You know, should we be granted that opportunity over the summer? So that's what I'm hearing, Dr. Contreras and Angie, that you've got monies in there to have the schoolhouses open and people working and that sort of thing.
I'm sorry, did you ask a question in that, or were you making a statement at the end?
Well, I think you answered it with Anita's question, that there indeed we are covered in these dollars that we're going to be approving here in the next month to, in fact, cover our expenses and the cost of potentially keeping the schools open this summer for extended learning and tutoring and those, wherever tutoring happens, whether it's in the schoolhouse or virtually.
Not in this. So we don't have the funds for extended learning in the budget that we are asking you to approve tonight. that would be included in perhaps the 21 million or in additional funds that the state would provide.
So it is in the 21 million.
It could be, but
Yeah.
the 21 million is not enough for 10 additional days for 100% of the students. So we believe that's something the state has taken up as an issue for all students across the state.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Byron and Linda.
So I'm still frustrated with the thought that we have conversations happening in our legislation as it relates to when, school is projected to go back, and we haven't, there's not really a lot of conversation with local school boards and superintendents, at least to my knowledge, about what it's actually going to take on the ground to reopen these schools to minimize another pandemic happening. Looking at the article from Triad City Beats here in Guilford County, based on their data, 33% of the deaths in Guilford County related to COVID-19 are African American, which slightly exceeds our 32.1% share of the county's overall population. We're majority Black and brown in this district, and to not have any clear idea of the funding that we're going to have, because based on this budget we're voting on tonight, it doesn't include substantial funding dedicated for reentry. It is our same, is literally the exact same budget we voted on last year. So with all these variables up in the air, this is a question for staff or superintendent, if you can answer. How is it as a board and as a community to make parents and staff members feel safe? Because staff members are alarmed that the protections they feel would be needed for them to feel comfortable to return to work in the fall are not there and are not being discussed, as well as parents and their children.
So the state just formed a reentry task force that does include superintendents, legislators, members of the governor's staff, the lieutenant governor, members from DPI. I believe there are school board members on there. So there is discussion about how we safely reopen. But I think, to your point, there are many, many factors to consider. And the funding for that is not clear at all. And it's very late in the school year to be thinking about totally new schedules. Are we going to A days, A, B days? Some students come in on A days. Are we going to weeks where students attend 1 day per week? How are we bringing students back? Just elementary students initially, and then secondary students? All of those things have to be determined, but there is a task force that is discussing this, that is representative of individuals from across the state and communities from across the state of North Carolina.
So is a diversity factor there, or is it just, what I'll look at that. I won't even ask you to answer that, because I'm curious to see how that's going to reflect. But that goes back to, you have our president, wanting to, urge states to reopen before the end of the school year. And then I do realize, in order for the economy to truly start getting back, we need, the leaders are wanting parents to return back to their jobs and to their businesses, but they really cannot do that successfully if their children are at home. But looking at, I think we talked about last time, a projection of what it would take to supply masks for our particular district, and how many masks is needed, never mind the cost or the ability to find those resources. So if this becomes another unfunded mandate, what are we able to do within the budget? Is that even known at this time? That's not. Okay. That's the part that's frustrating. I don't know if it needs to be emotional or a conversation, but I really feel that if the legislative, not the entire board, then the legislative committee needs to meet with the Guilford delegation to be clear about, where we are as a district and where our concerns are about how we would even anticipate to reopen and the funding that's needed. We can't afford for this to be another unfunded mandate. Because I would not support reopening schools if we have an unfunded mandate and we don't have clear instructions that make sense from people that are doing it every day, or trying to figure it out every day. That was a statement.
Thank you, Byron. We have Leslie.
Was it my turn now? I think the superintendent did hit on some challenging issues, but it even goes, you know, capacity-wise, we're going to have, all children won't be able to be back in the school building every day. I do think it is important that we try to get our children in front of our teachers at least 1 or 2 days, but it even gets more complicated in that you have a funneling problem in getting into the schools. Where everybody can't show up at the same time and manage that safely as far as getting children in, because there's only so many doors to get children in. So I'm hoping they take that all into consideration, but clearly we are going to have to look at some very different ways of having children in buildings during this coming year. So I don't know how quickly they can maneuver that, but there's a lot of challenging and trying to adjust to that by August 17th is definitely going to be a challenge. So I do hope they start providing more, you know, exposing the public to more debate about what they're thinking so that, you know, people can get more input and have more discussion, and there's a lot of, you know, there may be someone out there with a lot of creative ideas on that would be helpful. So I hope they become more vocal to the communities so that they can have some input as this moves forward, because it is critical to these parents and students and safety. Thanks.
I think to your point, there will have to be some national standards on health and safety so that we all understand what changes need to be employed to ensure physical distancing, what changes must be employed to enable health and sanitization protocols, changes to create healthy buildings, changes to ensure safety in terms of transportation to and from school, and the bus routes, all of those things we need standards for. And we also need standards for virtual education now, because there's going to be some form of blended education at least for another year. So what are the standards for distance learning? That has to be tackled before we just start implementing and returning to school. And as much as we are saying we don't feel comfortable reopening, the parents are going to make this choice for us if they don't feel it's safe, and they simply won't send their students back.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have Winston and Byron.
Yeah, my question is, do we have any follow-up on how the class size bill and some relief from that mandate impacts budget and plans, and how this budget takes that into account or doesn't, because we don't have an answer on that yet?
Yeah, this proposed legislation just freezes where we are this year. It doesn't waive anything beyond that.
And what about fund any additional enhancement teachers either? So it's freezing class size where it's at for the current year, and then it's not going to fund the additional 25%, which we estimated for Guilford County Schools would be about 40 additional teachers for enhancement.
So it doesn't fund the enhancement teachers. It freezes the class size bill. And are we going to get some information about what would be the consequences of our not complying with the class size bill?
I think we need to see what the law is, and then we'll work from there, and they'll be done this week, we hope. So we'll work on it when we see exactly what it says and figure that out.
Okay, thank you.
Byron? So I actually found out who's on the committee, and I'm going to state that because it definitely proves a point of concern. With the SRTF membership, you have the NC Department of Public Instruction leadership, Governor Roy Cooper's office, Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest, chair of the State Board's Digital Learning Committee, Susan Perry, NCDHHS, Senator Deanna Ballard, Senator Don Davis, Representative Jason Sane, Representative Jeffrey Elmore, Superintendent Stephen Basnight Hyde County, Superintendent Gina Conley Cherokee, Superintendent Marvin Connolly Cumberland, Superintendent Andrew Holland Union, Superintendent Anthony Jackson Vance, Superintendent Lynn Moody Rowan, Dana Jones with the Forsyth Board of Education, Susan Gates, Special Advisor on Education, SAS, Malbert Smith, representing Metametrics, Freebird McKinney, 2018 Teacher of the Year, Director of Government and Community Relations, State Board of Education, Jill Kamnitz, State Board of Education member, Courtney Crowder, External Affairs, Jonathan Feltz, External Affairs. There is not one representative as a superintendent or school board member of the 3 largest school districts in North Carolina on that board. And while I'm sure there's at least one person of color regarding the superintendents and other board members, this is a representation of rule and office people. This is not a representation of what it takes to open a district our size or Mecklenburg or Wake. And it is a difference. Our funding is different. And also, there are no women of color that is a part of this task force. So we've already seen the numbers up to what demographic is surviving COVID rate infection and recovery. And so those, to me, I mean, that needs to be representative. I don't know if this wants to reach out to Mark Johnson to request, an amendment to this membership, or to fight for that, or to have our Guilford delegation to raise the issue, because this is from my understanding, bipartisan task force. But the 3 things that they're specifically targeted with is improving opportunities. We hear you and recognize that remote learning options must be more user-friendly and practical. Is this best accomplished with more broadband, or are there more pragmatic options? Seriously. Number 2, mind the gap. There is going to be a learning gap due to missed school. There's been a learning gap for the past 60 years. This is what I'm talking about when you don't have us at the table, empowered and educated, raising these issues. That was not on the website. That was me. How do we best meet students at their ability level when they return? When they figure that out, can they let us know what we've been doing wrong? In terms of social distancing, the need for greater social distancing is likely unavoidable until there is a vaccine. The SRTF will help develop guidelines in partnership with NCDHHS, with goals of getting as many teachers and students back in schools as safely as possible and determining best paths forward for extracurricular activities. Where's the representation for students with special needs? Where's the representation for, when you have that representation? They're not at the table. But every school district, a significant part of their population, faces these issues. And the number of emails that we've had about how are we ensuring compliance with IEP, 504 plans, and things like that. There's no one at the table developing on this task force to provide those guidelines. So then we're left on our own. And we're open for potential lawsuit and litigation if we don't figure it out correctly. So is there anything that can be said?
Mr. Gladden, I would say, I hadn't read the questions, but I would say they're not the right questions. The questions are, when do you reopen and for whom? And what are the public health risks? What's the impact on student learning? And what is our ability to safeguard school systems with health and safety protocols? The second question would be, how do you get ready to reopen with respect to health and safety, re-enrollment, remediation, and how do you prepare for resurgence of COVID-19? And then the third question is, what kind of structures do you need to put in place to monitor and streamline the process? Team structure, governance, tools, communication strategies. I think those are the 3 big questions, not the sort of in the weeds things that are listed there. And that's a problem if the question isn't the right question in the first place. We're going to have some problems in trying to reopen.
So is there something that we can, raise, or a letter that we can send, Madam Chair, to, because this is for the blasphemy. This is like trying to and you talked about this during racial equity, of where we have people at the table that are not significantly impacted by the problem coming up with a solution. So how is that effective? And then looking at how we're already leading in population of deaths in Guilford County, that's going to increase. And so then whatever parents return back to work, if they're not going to be home with their children, they're going to also be exposed. And then we have the resurgence, what Dr. Contreras said earlier. I mean, this is maddening to me, is that once again, with all the diversity training, all the racial equity training, even with those that spew all lives matter, all lives are not at this table. And this is the table that is going to be advising legislators on what to fund and what to do. And I'm upset about it. I'll stop.
Thank you, Byron. We have Pat and then Winston.
Yeah, I would just offer up to my fellow board members, instead of attacking and playing identity politics with this bipartisan board, why don't we look at the recommendations they come up with and find the common ground? I mean, your supposition is that these people, no one cares about kids on this governor's task force. And I think we ought to, before we start identity shaming, why don't we just look at the recommendations and work with our legislative body and our legislators to figure out solutions, instead of playing this identity politics. It's getting a bit old.
Well, I'd like to.
Please address that.
It's quite simple. You're attacking people's resumes and what they're doing, and you don't even know the people.
Well, I disagree with Pat on this.
I'm not
Byron,
surprised you disagree, because that's fine.
Well, Pat, I haven't even said, talk about jumping, to a conclusion about somebody's position. But I do disagree that when we talk about who's missing at the table, that's attacking the people who are at the table. And to me, there's a nuance there that's different. And so I was going to ask earlier, are any of the three largest district superintendents at the table? Because Byron is right. The dynamics in our large districts are very different than smaller districts. And that doesn't mean they're more valid, but it means they're valid for a ton of kids and a ton of teachers and employees. And so, again, I think when we are not represented at the table and we're not having a dialogue at the level that the superintendent's talking about, the big issues that are impacting districts like ours, that are impacting kids of color and employees of color in way disproportionate amounts, that's not about shaming someone who represents a different demographic or is from a different county with a different context. Although, the data would tell us, even in those counties, the people of color are being disproportionately impacted, even if there's not that many of them in the county. And so I don't think raising the issue has to become, something that we take offense to. I think we do need to be laying the groundwork for how we may have to move through this counter to what the state does, and that we're not caught flat-footed if the recommendations of folks who don't govern in large districts, who aren't dealing with these dynamics, haven't taken into account the context of what our kids, our families, and our local context is. And I think so. Stating now our concerns about that to the task force gives us some credibility later. So they're not saying, oh, well, you didn't say anything back then, we would have welcomed you to the table. So I think it does make sense to raise concerns both about the questions that they're asking that we don't think are at a high enough level for a district of our size and scope, that it's completely appropriate to say that we don't think everyone's at the table who should be at the table. And we can do, and that we do that now because we may have to act. And there have been times in this district's history where the district did go against what the state had mandated. And I can remember sitting in the gallery of a Board of Ed meeting when some of the members of this board were on the board and voted to sue the state and to really claim the rights that teachers had as a constitutional right and to due process. And so I think there's a point here that we can make, and that we can especially make, to ensure that in this district, which is the one that we are charged with governing, and that the kids and the families and the employees here, and that the context here, which is woefully different than other counties, is factored into the questions and the decisions. And we should lay that groundwork now, whether it's a letter from our board to the State Board of Education or to the governor or to the task force to say, here's what, or whether it's setting up our own task force with the large districts to say, we're going to talk about these issues too and make some recommendations. And then we can bring the two together and see what good comes out of all of that. I mean, I agree there's ways to find common ground, but I'm concerned about the questions and our representation and the full representation of the kids we serve.
So Cumberland County, which is about our size, I mean, Fayetteville, the racial makeup, I mean, and I hear you. I think accountability is good. I just wanted to real quick. And I appreciate the questions we've raised. And I'm not saying that we just sit back and wait, but I mean, Cumberland, I mean, there is some diversity. I mean, Cumberland County is similar to our size. I mean, racial makeup, very similar. I mean, let's call it for what it is. And
we have two people before you, Pat. We have Byron and then Darlene.
Thank you. So to respond back to Mr. Tillman, I'm not attacking. The people on the task force, I don't know them, personally, and I have not reviewed their resumes. This speaks to the larger issue that we've seen on our board. It's not so much as, race. We're also looking at the fact that the size of our district is not at the table. And then you look at the racial implications that we represent as a school district is not at the table. I mean, even if it was a representative from our school district, regardless of race, but it's woke and engaged into the data and access that we have, to me, that is pertinent and relevant. I mean, because the difference between myself and every other school board member on the board, me being the only Black male, is that my risk for COVID-19 is 137%. No one else is at that level besides the African-American women that are on the school board. And so it is something that's different. It's not in the, we're not playing the oppression Olympics, but it's something that's very real. And to not have a true measure of that at the table, having these conversations when the meetings that you're having, the data that you're pulling, is not necessarily reflective to what you personally face. It is about having a personal conviction and a relatability of the demographics that are most in danger. And those demographics you represent, I represent, and every school board member in Guilford County represent, are those a majority Black and brown. We represent them all, but the Black and brown are at 136% risk of infection. That type of knowledge and that type of having that very present with you every time you go into that meeting and you have to lift up race and deal with people who want to debunk that race is not an issue. How race is clearly an issue as it relates to opioids. The task force didn't happen with opioids until the data came in that it was white males. Once it became white males, you had laser fast legislation and funding for that cause because it impacted the demographic majority that was making those decisions. It became real to them. And you saw the funding and the actions happen as the result of that. What I'm saying is I want to see that laser fast type of response and funding and legislation happen because it is happening to me and my community that represent and live in every day. So it's not an attack of who they are. It is an attack of their connection and their conviction to the communities that they represent. Because I don't have the ability to drop away from being Black or to go to a different part of the neighborhood and not be Black. I am Black wherever I go. And I'm at 136, 137% risk of infection every day based on my demographic. And that is the type of realness and honesty and conviction that should be at that table. And we should, I do like Winston's idea, and I think that should be a motion that we reach out to the other superintendents of Mecklenburg and Wake County to send a letter of rebuke, if not of reminder of what our districts are and representation of students and the fact that our voices are not at the table and that we create our own task force because we are different. And it's not judging any person on that task force. Obviously, it's some politics, it's bipartisan. I get that. It's about checking check boxes. I'm trying to save people, not check boxes. And that's where I stand.
Thank you, Byron. Darlene?
I'm making a motion that we reach out to the two other large school districts to create a whatever word you want to use for it, tribunal, joint task force as it relates to the size and demographic of our school district. We're different.
You get that, Jill?
Okay.
I'll second that for you.
Darlene, you were on mute, so we couldn't hear
we didn't
you.
get to hear.
Hold on, so we got it. Let's get
Sorry about that.
Byron made a motion.
You were
Kim
just
seconded that.
talking away, but we couldn't hear you.
I did, what I said is I do think it's important that we have good representation, not just for Guilford County Schools, but, you know, representing all of us. And so I think that is important. Do we know who appointed this task force? Or who was responsible for, you know, deciding who's on there? Because that's probably who we need to go to.
This, based on what we read, this is the state superintendent task force.
And he's being sued.
Oh, okay. Well, I do think it's important. I don't know, they may have EC representation, but I think that's a must, especially, you know, if we're not going to have school with regular hours every day. Yes. I think EC is so important. And I obviously think a large system needs to be represented. I think Dr. Contreras will be a great representative on there. And I do think we need to look at the diversity. They may have diversity that we might not be aware of. I do know that Senator Davis is an African-American male, and he's on there. But maybe we could ask for maybe an African-American doctor to be put on there because, you know, African-Americans are at more risk. So that I just think it is important, and I think we should contact whoever is making these appointments, and maybe we can try to go even around them if we need to. Like, we could go to our legislators, we could go to our state board rep, and just let them know that there needs to be additional representation, because these are really, really big decisions being made. And I do think too, we need to demonstrate a little bit more patience, because they haven't even had the opportunity to meet yet. And all this is brand new. And I know you guys are probably just as tired as I am of staying at home. And it's just, we're all very frustrated right now. But I think we do need to be patient, but we also need to stand up for what we think is, you know, more representation on the task force. Thank you.
Linda, are you trying to unmute yourself or raise your hand?
I just want to make sure if you will repeat the motion and make it clear what the motion is.
So I'm going to read what I believe was said, and then you consider if that's actually what you mean to do. So the motion was to contact Charlotte and Wake superintendents to set up a task force to discuss reopening and other issues related to COVID-19. I don't know that you need a motion to have someone contact two superintendents, but it's up to you guys. If that's really what you want to do, or if what you really meant was to somehow or other request more representation from those groups. I'm not sure what exactly the intent of the motion was, so I'm having a hard time restructuring.
Well, sorry, I'm raising my hand.
Winston.
Can it be that we direct the superintendent to contact those other two superintendents and talk about the best course of action to ensure representation, either some communication, as Darlene has suggested, to the current task force and the appointees, or to talk about a letter they might jointly draft saying these are the essential questions impacting us. We want representation at the table. And if we don't get positive response, then there's an opportunity to form an alternative group. Is that I don't know if that's a substitute motion or just a clarifying question. I just don't know if you need a motion to ask the superintendent contact two other superintendents. I guess that's kind of my.
Just for clarity, I'm raising my hand. From the motion that I heard say is that.
Hold on just a minute, Dianne can move up.
You can raise your hand in the participant chat is where I can see your hands raised, because there's so many people on this call. I have to switch screens so I can't see you visually, but if you will raise your hand on the participant little app, there you go. So Dianne, then Kim.
My question is, I would be hesitant to have a formal motion at this point instead of letting our superintendent investigate, because it could be that the other school districts are okay with this, hadn't thought about it. And so I think it would be respectful just to ask if our staff or the superintendent would do some reaching out, and also contact, we do have a ally, if you will, on the state school board, to just contact him and have a conversation to say, how did this particular board get appointed, and there doesn't appear to be some equitable representation. Plus, just assuming that because someone is Black and on the board doesn't necessarily mean that they support some of the issues and concerns that some of us have. So you can't just say because you have a Black member on that board that he is, supportive, because he did vote with the Republicans for if we get partisan, for the budget. So I wasn't particularly thrilled about him being there just based on some of his past records. But that would be my suggestion as opposed to us, making a formal motion.
Now it's Kim.
Well, I definitely disagree with that, because I think making a motion means that it's a board decision. We don't want to have our superintendent not having the backing of the board. So I think it's very important that we do make that motion, and giving that direction that we reach out to the other two larger districts and make sure that there is this collaboration happening. And if they want to opt out of that, then that's fine. Then Guilford County can go it alone as fighting for that representation. But I do think that
we've done it before.
It's very important that we support the superintendent at what it is that we're directing her to do.
Byron?
So since I led with the motion, I do agree with Tim, and I have to disagree with Dianne Bellamy, because to my knowledge, the superintendent of this county as well as Mecklenburg was not outreached by the state superintendent. And there is no representation of a large district. So this is not just about race. This is also about that the representation and how we operate is different. And so when it comes to funding, we're funded differently because of our size. We have different, larger problems on a larger scale because of the size that we have. We have different challenges because of our size. And so when it comes to reopening something that's critical regarding children's lives, a representation of the big three needs to be at that table. And so to further clarify my motion, Kim, if you would be willing to consider to second, wait a minute, let me get my notes here, because this Zoom stuff is just like Zoom. You just moving and shaking. Is that a motion that a letter be sent by the board chair to the state superintendent requesting expansion of the task force to include to include our superintendent, or at least a superintendent of the three largest school districts in the state of North Carolina.
Yes, I can second that still.
Or to direct for, I mean, I don't want it to be like we're just trying to, we'll represent both. So okay, so with the wording with and, Jill, can we make that wording, can we clean up that wording so it
the motion would be to direct the superintendent to direct the chair to send a letter to the task force requesting expansion of the task force to include a superintendent for one of the three major schools.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, Pat, your hand's up.
What would the superintendent like to do? I don't even think we've heard from Dr. Contreras on this, and we're really getting out and maybe in front of that a little bit. And I'm happy to expand this, and I wanted to be clear. I think the more input we have, the better. And I certainly don't want Guilford County to take a backseat to anybody. I had a little bit of a problem with the first initial comments, but Dr. Contreras, I mean, what would you like to do? And if it's a motion and a vote, that's fine. But have we heard from the superintendent on this? Just curious.
I think it will, if we form our own task force, it will be difficult for us to be recognized by any formal body because it won't have the General Assembly members on there and others. So I think that could be a problem. I also think that making a motion that is personal about any one superintendent will come across potentially as self-serving instead of just saying we don't feel that the largest 3 districts are represented and that these districts are different in the way that they have to consider just the issue of scale and the diversity of students. So I shared with the large districts that just our homeless populations are larger than some of the school districts in the state. Like our homeless population is larger than a school district, than several school districts. So I think the best way to approach this is to ask for representation on all task forces related to COVID-19 and reentry to include representation from the large districts, from members of the large school districts. Because it's not a personal thing. It is about representing the district. So it may not be me. It may be the board chair. It may be a superintendent from a large district and a board chair from a large district, a different large district. But certainly the 3 largest districts should be represented.
I thought that's what he said, by the way, so.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say that it's really hard to miss, you know, the 3 largest districts in here. I don't know how the state superintendent of a, you know, very large school district in the state could miss, you know, larger urban school districts and representation from people of color. There are realities that we are going to bring up. It doesn't mean that people don't care about all students or about all patients or about all employees. It's just that if it's not your reality, if it's not your community, it's not what you're living and what you're tuned into every day. I mean, the health webinars, the health meetings that are had across this country on the news, on the internet around the disparity and not only why that African Americans are experiencing the most devastating impact of this, but why are they? And you know what? They happen to be the same population that's not getting the best out of an educational system. They happen to be the same population that's going to be hit the hardest economically, whether you're talking about small businesses. That says there's something systemic when it can span across the continuum of how our society functions and operates. And so if you don't have a voice there that can help bring that analysis forward, those things won't get addressed. They won't get funded. They won't get attention. You have to keep this on the table. If race is present in the outcomes, an analysis of race has to be part of the interventions and the funding and the programs, or it will not work for that population. And if someone is not on this task force that can bring that to the committee members for the awareness and to the education, it's just not going to happen. And I just don't know how you can miss that in this state with these school districts here and with the data that we have. So the motion's on the table. We can, if there are no other comments, I don't see any other. Oh, I do see Dianne Bellamy's Small's hand raised. And then after that, we can take a vote.
And my question is to the superintendent. Do you need this motion in order to work on trying to make this happen?
She wants to know, can you say that again, Diane? She couldn't really hear you.
Okay, I just want to know, does she need for us to do a motion for her to, work on trying to, communicate with the other districts to see, how do we communicate to, since it was the state board that put this thing together, giving them the benefit of the doubt that maybe this was an oversight, maybe it wasn't an intentional one.
I think the motion was for the board to take action. Can you read the motion again, Jill? If that helps Diane. You're muted, Jill. You're muted, Jill.
Yes, I'm sorry. After the superintendent's comments, I wonder if you want to change one word too. So I'll highlight what that word is as we go. The motion was to direct the board chair to send a letter requesting to expand the task force to include, it said originally, a superintendent from one of the 3 large school systems. And I wonder if you want to say, after what the superintendent said, representation from one of the 3 large school systems. And so I throw to Byron whether he would like to change superintendent to representation. And if not, the original motion was to include one of the 3 superintendents.
At least one, could be 2.
Okay.
I agree with that friendly amendment with Winston. I would say at least a superintendent or superintendent designee. If Kim is okay, since she seconded the motion with that change, I'm fine with changing that wording. If not, superintendent or superintendent designee to be at the table.
Okay, that was not what I said. What I believe Dr. Contreras said was it could be a board member, it could be representation. I don't think you would let somebody be designated to a task force. I think it needs to be someone who's formally appointed. So I wouldn't say superintendent designee. I don't think that's how task forces get set up. I think you either have to say a representative or a superintendent.
Yeah, my recommendation is that board members from the largest districts and both a board member and superintendent from one of the 3 largest districts should be on the task force.
So,
I accept that.
And board member.
I accept that. Kim, you're UK?
Yeah, that as long as we get the representation, I believe that's our bottom line.
All right, so we're ready to vote. The question.
Can we raise our hands for the vote or no?
We can't see some people.
Yeah. You can do it in the chat. I think, Jill, would everybody be able to see that in the chat?
I can barely hear you again.
Would everybody be able to see the hands raised if it was in the chat?
Oh, that's why you couldn't hear me. I said if people voted by raising their hand in the participant chat, because there's a record of that, would that work?
Yeah, I guessed. You can do it that way.
Yes, you don't have to raise your hand. There's a yes or no there.
I would not be able to see the participants.
Okay, so we'll just do it by person. Okay.
That'll be easier.
Okay, Winston?
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
Linda?
Yes.
Darlene?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes, but I still didn't get my question answered from the superintendent.
I think your
okay,
community
I'm sorry.
would want it.
Pat?
Yes.
Anita?
Yes.
Byron?
Absolutely.
And Dina, yes. All right, well, that passes unanimously. Diane, I'm sorry.
Lisa, to you.
Say that again, Jill.
I was just going to say, I'll send the wording to Lisa.
And Diane, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, will you be responsible for drafting this letter, or will the superintendent, in pre-work to the letter, go ahead and reach out to the state school board and to these other districts to see where they are with this?
I mean, again, the motion was, and Dr. Contreras can answer, Dianne, but the motion was for the board to do this and not the superintendent. So that,
but somebody's got to do the legwork that is the assumption of why you're doing this. Am I wrong?
It could be like someone calls Dan Forrest or Mark Johnson and does this the old-fashioned way, calls them up and says, hey, can we talk about expanding the pool? And that's one way to do it.
I mean, since you're going to go through this effort, to me, somebody's got to talk to somebody, because you already are giving the impression that no one talked to anyone previously.
Well, the way that we can work with Jill, the way that we write the letter can represent what it is that you're talking about. You know, we don't have to, say it from a particular perspective that no one's been contacted, but to notice the lack of representation on the current task force.
Okay, maybe I'm pressing the wrong button here. Can we not just pick up the phone and talk to somebody about?
We already voted on a motion.
Huh?
We can certainly do that as well.
Yeah, I think some personal relationship contact, if it's helpful, in addition to the letters and all those things, which are great, I mean, that's what's going to, I think, need to happen to get something done if we want this to work. And I'm happy to help and with Madam Chair or whatever, but anyway.
Okay, we've got Byron and then Kim.
I'll just say, since it was my motion and for the superintendent, my question is to the superintendent, is so that it's on the record and it's clear. Did the office of the state superintendent, Mark Johnson, reach out to you or your staff members about being involved in the task force?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've at least confirmed that Guilford County has not, either in writing or by phone conversation, received a notification or request to have representation at that task force. And since we just voted that that's not acceptable in so many words, and that to respond with a letter asking, for it to be expanded or to be considered to have representation from the 3 largest school districts. So while, we have board members that have great working relationships and even family members in the legislature. And it's my understanding from what I've read, and I sent the list out to all of you just now about who's on the task force, that the 3 largest districts are not represented. And we have unique challenges, and we are impacted the most by lack of funding and lack of planning by the state. And to reiterate the superintendent's words earlier, our homeless population is larger than the districts that are representing at this task force in many cases. So, I feel that, we should be at the table, and we should not just accept a task force that was put together without any known considerations. And we can do backdoor phone calls. We can reach out to our Guilford legislation. But at some point, we have to realize that it's not a slight or a whoopsie, that things are just done intentional. When this board a few years ago sued the state for teachers' tenure, it wasn't a oops or a slight. It was something deliberate that the legislator was doing at the particular time. And Guilford County decided to respond, not necessarily with, at least to my knowledge, I'm welcome to be corrected, with a backdoor effort, but to respond with legal action. And so there comes a time to talk, and there comes a time to do the walk. And I think we're at this point, because we're at this pandemic, let's do the walk. We're walking a nice letter, not a nasty one, and then let them respond, and then have the conversations at that point, instead of doing the backdoor challenge and we never get anywhere. This task force has already been announced. So I don't know how much backdoor talking we can do. We are on streaming on every network, local network anyway, that is happening. So there needs to be a response. Someone in Raleigh is watching this, and hopefully they'll make the call tomorrow.
Sorry, Kim?
I just wanted to say that I believe that it is very important that we do put things in writing, so that way it will never be said that it wasn't said. And in communicating, that's just a professional courtesy that we should give Mr. Johnson as well.
I think Jill said we could do both. So we can, prepare the
language in the motion and do our diligence as far as, inquiring about that. I don't think one will impact the other, because I think our statement can be as impactful with the information as it can without it. And for me, it wouldn't change the language of the communication that we're preparing to send. So if it's okay with Byron or Kim and everyone else, if people want to inquire or, to seek any information about, how people were selected, I don't think that, well, one, anyone can do that, but I don't think it'll change the content or the urgency and the meaning of the communication that we're going to share with them.
Nina.
Yes.
I've been raising my hand and raising my hand. I know you can't see it, but the statement was made that none of the three largest districts were contacted about this. How do we know that?
No, they said they're not represented on here.
Now, they said ask. I just wondered how we knew that. Have we talked to them, the other two?
I'm not sure who said that they hadn't been asked.
Okay.
So if you want to ask that person, that's fine. But as Byron read the list, that there are no urban districts, large urban districts, the three largest on here. So I don't have any way of knowing that.
So Anita, I made the comment I alluded to. They were not asked because I don't believe I've met two. Well, obviously I work with one of the Dr. Contreras, the third largest. I've also met with the Mecklenburg superintendent. I've not had the pleasure of meeting with the Wake County. It would not make rational sense for a superintendent of those school districts to be offered a position and to not share it with the other two superintendents that they were offered and then to decline it. So I am making an assumption, which I have emails and messages out to those board members of those two school districts to confirm whether or not their superintendents were asked. And I can share that report once I get a response.
Thank you for the clarification.
I don't see any other hands raised in the participant area here. Is there anybody else that's raising their hand that I can't see? Any additional
Dana,
comments?
Dana,
Yes.
could someone tell me how to get into the participant so that I don't have to sit here and wave my hand at nothing?
Tap. Are you on a laptop or an iPad?
An iPad.
So if you touch your finger up in the top right-hand corner of the screen, you'll get a bar that has some things on it like a phone number and lead meeting. And then there's up there, there's something called participants. And when you touch that, then down at the bottom, you can say yes, no, raise your hand, tell everybody to go faster or slower.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That limits my technical expertise right there. That's the end of it.
And Stephen's got a helpful little cartoon there with like two bodies on it. So.
All right, so if there's no other discussion, we are now at board member comments. Let's see, I'll start with Winston because you're first on my screen.
I just want to thank all of the families and our employees. And there's a whole bunch of people out there watching this. So hello to everybody out there on Facebook watching the meeting. I'm seeing some of your comments. I love all the nerds who are tuning in to watch us. And I do also appreciate the emails that I've gotten this week. I'm sure my colleagues have too, from some parents of EC students really making real the demands their kids don't just deserve, but they have a right to. And I think the federal government and the state government need to really provide the resources for us to provide those full services that kids have a right to. And so just hear those concerns from parents, and we'll keep working on that very hard. So thank you.
Thank you. Linda?
I just want to say thank you to all those people out there that are still, doing their very best to make this pandemic work in our learning environment. I was over at Southeast and the ladies were very gracious handing out lunches out there. I also have been out, I saw numerous young ladies out at the park. I go walk at Hagenstone, and there for prom night, there were some families out there taking photos and trying to make special memories. Me and my husband actually had to divert around a group of family trying to make that prom night very special for their children. I saw on Facebook where families were having their prom for their couple, especially at home. I've also seen a lot of people trying to give special recognition to our seniors while they struggle through this difficult time and try to make it special. So shout out to all the young prom people that may have been not been able to have the prom like they wanted, but trying to make the special that they can, and all our seniors trying to work through how we make that special. And so I just want to give a shout out to all our teachers and everyone that keeps moving forward the best they can to try to do the best they can.
Thank you. Dianne, then Pat.
First of all, I want to thank the Greater High Point Schools Partnership for continuing to try to include work for us to remember our students and our teachers. We were supposed to have a teacher appreciation function that is not going to happen, but they still have encouraged us to do some other things. So to Don Spencer and the rest of the board that's working on that, I appreciate that. I hope we do remember and understand that the graduation and the planning graduation is in the purview of our superintendent. And I think we experienced trying to do that in lieu of her before. And I think we probably need to just step back and take a breath when it comes to what's going to happen with graduation. Young people still need the guidance of the elders. Those of us who have lived through the polio epidemic, at least 4 wars, economic threats, racial conflicts, know what it means to have a dream deferred. To do what is wise and prudent now will give the class of 2020 their opportunity and their families the opportunity to be able to share what they have become in 2030. So I just simply lift that up as a thought for us. I realize that we are people who, our Achilles heel is our need for instant gratification. And I think that can be something to hurt us if we're not wise in the decisions that we make about trying to satisfy that particular desire and not looking at the long-term picture. I want to thank all of GCAS staff for the difficult work that they have been doing and will do. And I'm glad that we have the kind of leadership we have with Dr. Contreras and her team, that every day they get up and try to figure it out. And I appreciate that. And then lastly, I'd like to wish all of those who are mothers a happy Mother's Day, because we probably will not meet again before that time. And if it never was special, I know that this year, being able to say Happy Mother's Day to your mother is very important in a way that we've never thought before. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And then Anita.
Thank you. Just really want to spend my only couple minutes here just sharing how grateful I am for really a debt that we can never fully repay. Our teachers, our superintendent, her team, our classified staff, all the volunteers that are out there making things happen every day. And so we're just take a moment for a small token of appreciation for them. I also really want to emphasize at any time of tragedy or hardship, there will come positives and there'll be innovation and creativity. We're already seeing that with this board and some of the ideas that were floated tonight with our superintendent and the staff. And at the school level, just for a quick couple of examples, at Southeast Guilford High School, for example, the principal there, they're essentially doing a virtual graduation where students drive up and they get their picture made. And just the level of creativity and joy that in some of the darker moments that in Grimsley High School and in my district, there was a graduate program where it was created by some parents and it took hold. So I think it was somewhere around 450-ish, my number's off maybe, Grimsley graduates had someone adopt them, and they will receive a care package and something that will happen over the next couple months. And so it's these things that happen that really reinforce for me what's really good about humanity, and if we can, things that we can all agree on, and that learning never stops. And don't let this virus define you, and don't let you be a victim to it. I mean, learning must continue. It will continue. And for everyone that can hear this, students and parents, we're going to give you every tool and every resource, and we're going to fight for your child every step of the way as best we can. And so know that, and please know that we're committed to doing that for every student in the district, and that learning never will stop. And the will to win and succeed and to do good things, I think, can take us a long way. So thanks to everybody, and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers.
Thanks, Pat. Anita and Darlene.
First of all, I want to say a very heartfelt thank you to all of our staff, our teachers who are working so very hard, our bus drivers, counselors, social workers, cafeteria staff, custodians, principals, central office staff, and everyone who has worked so hard to make this work. But I would also like to read something that hit home with me. As an essential worker, I have worked every day during this pandemic and have been grateful to be able to do so. But some people don't agree with the state opening. That's okay. Be kind. Some people are still planning to stay home. That's okay. Be kind. Some are still scared of getting the virus and a second wave happening. That's okay. Be kind. Some are sighing with relief to go back to work, knowing they may not lose their business or their homes. That's okay. Be kind. Some are thankful they can finally have a surgery they've put off. That's okay. Be kind. Some will be able to attend interviews after weeks without a job. That's okay. Be kind. Some will continue to wear masks for weeks. That's okay. Be kind. Some will rush out and get the hair done or the nails done. That's okay. Be kind. The point is, everyone has different viewpoints on this virus and different feelings, and that's okay. Be kind. We each have a different story. If you need to stay home, but be kind.
Thank you, Anita. Darlene?
Darlene, you're on mute. Sorry. Okay, I just wanted to tell you that I have been to some virtual concerts lately, and they've been great. Weaver Academy had their senior capstone recitals. They have two seniors, Damon Chrisman. He is an awesome guitar player, and if you can, he was on Facebook Live. I don't know if he's still there. If not, you can try YouTube. But he started playing when he was 5 years old, and under the direction of Keith Allen for 10 years. And then he went to Weaver, and he's participated in a lot of classical guitar performances, and he's also been in different he's been to festivals where he's won certain awards, and he is going to go to ECU to study guitar performance. My favorite song that he played was the Prelude from Cello Suite Number 1 by Johann Sebastian Bach, and if you can listen to it, you should. The other senior was Montserrat Padilla Ojeda, and she started playing the violin when she was 7 and until she was about 11, and then she switched to guitar, and she studied and then came to Weaver, and she's also an excellent guitar player, and she plans to go to GTCC for 2 years to study architecture and then go to NC State. There were some other concerts they had. I know you can see these on YouTube. They're called Stairwell Sessions, and you should really go and listen to them. They are like so relaxing. I was playing them, and my husband came in the room and he said, "Gosh, those are good. Where are you hearing those?" And I said, "They're Weaver students." So anyway, I just want to congratulate Savannah Barkley, Jason Miller, Theo Perkins, and then the music production program at Weaver. They also have a stairwell session that's really great, and that was performed by Aiden Swift, Amanda Sycamore, and Jason Kreider. Then the last thing about Weaver, I need to talk about Patrick Louie. He is the guitar teacher there, and he is awesome. He recently got together with 2 other schools of music that are very renowned. One is from Rochester, New York. Our superintendent might have heard of this school. It's called the Eastman Community Music School, and then the Interlochen Center for Arts in Michigan. And so what they did is they have different sessions. I think they have 3 different times where they have 3 students perform like on Zoom, and then their students from each of these schools will give them critical suggestions. So it's a great endeavor, and I really salute Mr. Louie for doing this. He, like I said, he's an awesome teacher. We are so lucky to have him here in Guilford County Schools. And as I close out, I too want to thank everyone, the superintendent, all the central office staff, our wonderful hardworking teachers and teachers assistants, and our cafeteria workers who are providing meals, and our bus drivers and our custodians, and then also the people on the front lines, our doctors and our nurses that go to work every day putting their lives on the line, and our first responders and the people who work in the grocery stores and the meat processing plants. I just want to say thank you to all of you, and God bless you, and I hope everyone stays safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Darlene. Linda?
I already had my turn.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But you can give it to me again.
Oh, I'm sorry. The screen must have moved. Kim?
I just want to say that, I'm grateful to, Guilford County staff and, the teachers, the principals, that are just holding down the fort, doing the best that they can. I had the opportunity to go over to Southwest Guilford High and participate in their cap and gown pickup, and the moms and the dads, the cars came around, and every car was full, of family and, students, carpooling to make sure that their, fellow student was able to pick up their cap and gown. The mascot was out there really celebrating the students. And I have to say that it was very well orchestrated. None of the students got out of the car. Whatever we needed to do for social distancing, all of the rules were in place. So a big shout out to Mr. Hettenbach for, pulling that off with his great staff and allowing me to participate as well. I'm just very grateful. And I just want to close by reciting a short poem by Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and I eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table. When company comes, nobody dare say to me, eat in the kitchen. Then, besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America by Langston Hughes. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Byron?
Thank you. Am I muted? Hold on. My phone locked. Hold on. So definitely like to thank, send out a happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers whether you are a biological mother or you are being a mother to someone else's biological child. It is a holiday that's not necessarily rooted in blood, but in care and devotion, and to your respective role. Also, thank you to all of our healthcare workers, all of our essential workers. We have a couple on the board that have already stated that. To our bus drivers, central office staff, those that are working remotely and those that are going out into the field every day to ensure parents and community members and staff have what they need and children have what they need. Thank you. I want to thank the board for the unanimous motion that happened tonight. And to be clear about where I'm coming from, and if it doesn't, if it doesn't step on your toes, then don't say ouch, is when I represent the same Black children every school board member represents. We have our individual districts, but we represent 73,000 children, the majority that are Black and brown. And while some board members lead or back up and support when I feel that no one else is leading with a potential response or solution or bridging the conversation or being uncomfortable in the conversation as it relates to race, we all have seen the same data. We all have seen the same reports. The difference is not all of us live what we see in the data every day. And a lot of times there is the rebuke and backlash for those that live it every day versus those that read about it on our prompts and in our emails and in our packets. It's very real. And so while my passion may be misconstrued as a lot of different things, is that it should not always take a Black voice to lead for this district or to speak truth to power about this district. And I'm going off the same data that every board member has. It shouldn't be about a tax. It has in the past, and I've been guilty of that as well. And I've grown from that, and many of us have grown from that and are leading with that. But let's be mindful that we all represent the same children. Black and brown children in this district are the foundation. And based on what, experts are saying about the recovery or lack of recovery in terms of the education that they've lost, and we were already struggling with the achievement gap to get them on grade level, that means our foundation has gone from a crumbling state to potentially non-existent, which means our other children are going to potentially fall into achievement gaps unless we have the structure and funding in place. And I don't think it's going to come with a big bow. I think that this board and other school boards across the state and the country have to get real and even have to consider forms of legal action if it takes to make sure that we are recognized and that it's not through a backdoor deal. It is through letting you know that our children are suffering and they are our future. We are not leading in the world in terms of education. Why is that? Because education has always been an option. It has not been a priority in this country, and certainly in this state. So this may be a time for us to raise hell as a school board, and that's okay. This may be time for us to stand, put aside partisan issues, and realize our only issue is the welfare of all children. And that we can disagree about personality or presentation or how something was said or worded. We can differ about the details later. We can have that conversation in the back end. But the parents of these children are at risk every day, and they're losing money, and they're being denied the paycheck protection programs because of structural issues. They're still waiting on food stamps. They're still waiting on government entities that, because this pandemic is so new and they're so unprepared, they're falling through the cracks. Why is it that in 2020, we still have to declare that Black Lives Matter, that my life matters, and that I need to be tested for COVID-19? Because I can't get a test in Guilford County. I don't fit the criteria. Yet when I speak to other people who don't look like me, they've been tested more than once. So to have to demand for equity in testing, as well as demand for racialized data, why are we having to demand this in 2020? It's been demanded so much that many board members are not even aware that what you view as a standard used to be non-existent. We did not care about racial data to the level we do now in this district. It took a lot of people raising hell consistently to get to this point. So when somebody leaves the charge that we need support and we need to be at the table, it is not an attack on who is at the table. It is about the fact that the representation for it to be effective for us, because everyone is looking to the state and they don't have educators at the state level. And educators have not been trained to prepare for this type of pandemic. They're probably going to come out with a new degree because of what is happening with COVID-19. So everyone, no matter how many years of experience they have, the degrees that they have, they are starting from ground zero trying to figure it out. But I don't want a child in Guilford County or in either county, because we let the state tell us when they go back and what restrictions they think is safe, and we wind up having a child being homeless or put into foster care because their parents are dead from this disease. That is what I think about. I'm not up for re-election. That part was over with in March. I don't have any children. I'm the only school board member that doesn't have a living child. So I don't have the bias from my own children. I am for all children. And I want us to get to that point and stay at that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Byron. I again want to congratulate Dr. Contreras being named Superintendent of the Year by the Piedmont Triad Education Consortium. They're a collaboration of 17 K through 12 public schools in the Central North Carolina and in partnership with UNCG. And so that says a lot about your leadership in this district. I too am torn between what our seniors and their families are going through, trying to teach children, trying to work, trying to handle their own duties and obligations, our employees and those that are struggling and trying to figure out how, things are going day to day. And dealing with the reality of a friend of mine lost his 34-year-old son who was a first responder, and it was just tragic watching the drive-by vigil and then having to drive to South Carolina to bury his son. Another young lady, both of her parents had been diagnosed with COVID-19 and died in 2 separate hospitals, and was just unable to get information. The hospitals are overwhelmed. People are calling, I'm trying to get an update on my parents, and then to find out both of your parents have died. So, for people who are calling and concerned about things that are really important to them, just know that there are just a plethora of things that are going on that just span the range of unfortunate to tragic. And we just have to keep things into perspective. So I want to thank the district and everything that they're doing. I get to come here for all of the meetings so I can see the staff without their glam squad. And I'm going to take pictures of Angie and Whitney next time so you can see their outgrown hair and their bushy eyebrows and the poor manicures. So we'll have something to remember. So thank everyone for all that you're doing in the district, and have a great evening and a wonderful, safe weekend. So is there a motion?
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
But I see what's in. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? All right, the motion carries. Good night, everyone.
Good night.